So today, I think we have a great panel lined up, and I'm going to start by introducing our panelists. Starting from your left, we have Rob Ball, the CEO of Shoulder Innovations and a director at Genesis Innovation Group, where he manages medical device engineering and development. He has spent more than a decade bringing medical device technologies to market, including proprietary orthopedic materials. He previously held roles at Tornier and DePuy Synthes. Mr. Ball holds more than 30 issued or pending patents. Dr. Will Barsoom is President and Chief Transformation Officer at Healthcare Outcomes Performance Company, or HOPCO. He previously served as President and CEO of Cleveland Clinic, Florida. Dr. Barsoom has published over 200 peer-reviewed articles and has presented at over 300 conferences internationally. Dr. Nitin Goyal is Chief Science, Technology, and Innovation Officer for Zimmer Biomet. He previously served as Chief Medical Officer and Senior Vice President of Innovation and Digital Care Delivery for Optum at United Health Group. In addition to an ongoing clinical practice, Dr. Goyal founded Pulse Platform and Surgical Creations, leading both companies from inception to acquisition. And all the way on your right is Kevin McGann, President and CEO of Excellis. He previously served as Chief Commercial Officer of Excellis and its predecessor company, Integrity Implants. So thank you once again to our esteemed panel. And I'm going to ask everyone to just sit tight for a few moments while I tee up our conversation with a brief presentation looking at the orthopedic market. And now all I want to cover today is 2022 performance, our early expectations for 2023, and then I want to touch on three trends that we think are shaping the near-term future of orthopedics: the pivot to digital, the ongoing consolidation within the industry, and the move of procedures into outpatient settings. So let's get started. Okay, so I would say that the orthopedic market improved in 2022. This chart shows worldwide orthopedic sales by year, 2018 to 2022. You can clearly see the disruption caused by the pandemic, but as we get over into 2022, we get something approximating our traditional or our historical growth rate. We estimate that the market grew 3.5% to a worldwide total of $55.5 billion. But it was a dynamic environment in 2022. Supply chain disruption, staffing shortages, very real obstacles and hurdles. We did see improving procedure volumes, but that was not across the board. Joint replacement in particular really picked up last year after a couple of years of lagging recovery. However, we had ongoing softness in complex spine, in trauma, and some areas of sports medicine. And then, of course, volume-based procurement in China is a massive headwind for the industry over the next couple of years. Our expectations for 2023 are largely the same. I forecast at 3.4% growth to a worldwide total of $57.3 billion. And after the first quarter results came out, I was afraid that I kind of undershot a little bit because the joint replacement market is running extremely hot. We estimated that knee replacement, for example, grew 13% in the first quarter, but that's against weak comparisons and some amount of tailwind from backlog procedures. I don't think anybody is really sure what the backlog really is, and I think that lingering uncertainty is very evident when you look at the guidance provided by public companies for 2023. Even amongst the companies that performed very well in Q1, very conservative guidance, a lot of prudence. And I think we're going to need to see a sustained recovery over many quarters before we can declare victory. And then, as I mentioned, volume-based procurement is a headwind for joint replacement, spine, and trauma. All right, let's pivot over to those three market drivers, those three trends that I talked about, starting with orthopedics pivot to digital. And I think a really stark illustration of that is this chart right here. This chart is showing the number of joint replacement robots in the United States by year from 2018 to the forecasted 2026. And you can see that that ramp could even accelerate more as we move away. Over the last year and change, we've moved away from the outright sale of these units to more rental agreements and volume-based agreements that are making it easier for healthcare systems to get one or more robot. And we know that the top players in this space are all in on both digital in general. Medtronic has said that a, quote, disproportionate amount of their R&D is going towards digital. Zimmer Biomet previously said that 70% of their R&D spend is towards ZB Edge, their digital ecosystem. Our second trend is the consolidation within the industry. This chart shows orthopedic-specific M&A transactions from 2016 to early May of this year. Now you can see that ramp, and we peak at 2020, but then the sustained market disruption causes that activity to take a big step back. We've declined 2 years in a row, and it's trending towards another decline this year. However, in the face of that overall activity decline, we are already a highly consolidated industry. This is the same chart that we saw in the first slide. Worldwide sales by year. All you really need to pay attention to on this is the light green on the bottom of each bar. That is the portion contributed by companies with annual sales over $1 billion. Or to put it another way, in 2022, 66.5% of all orthopedic sales came from just 8 companies. And in reality, that'll be 7 companies in a few months as Globus and NuVasive complete their merger. And then finally, the acceleration of outpatient orthopedics. This has been a trend that's been going on in the industry for quite a while, but it seems certainly since COVID that it has reached critical mass. We were at a tipping point for this trend. However, there are still some real obstacles that we have to overcome. One is simply physical capacity, the number of buildings. And then reimbursement is not where it needs to be for all the procedures that would play well in that setting. But already we see that they're driving design considerations for both implants, instrument trays, and enabling technology. And we also know that the top players in the space are heavily invested in dominating this trend. And I think the breadth and depth of their offering, their ability to deploy specialized teams for contracting, I think gives them a unique competitive advantage in that space. So I'm going to leave it there for now so we can jump over and start our panel discussion. All right, so I think one of the main through lines of all of that is the ongoing disruption in the industry over a number of years. And Rob, if I can start with you, how has that disruption changed your strategy at your companies, and has it uncovered any new growth opportunities?
Sure, yeah, I appreciate that. You know, I think obviously Mike outlined for us a number of topics he wanted to cover, and from my perspective, many of you know I'm a founder of Genesis Innovation Group, so very involved in very early stage companies, and so that will almost always be my perspective or view as we look at these things. And so specifically for Shoulder Innovations, as a small company, as we entered the pandemic, our number one priority was being able to make sure we could maintain a supply chain, right? I mean, so that involved, you know, kind of 2 significant investments. One is ensuring, as a very small company, really with very little demand in the grand scheme of things for our supply base, making sure that they understood our vision and our aspirations, if that makes sense, and were able to commit with us and partner with us to be able to supply. And it also meant that we knew we needed to dramatically increase, you know, the amount of spend or capital resources we spent on instrumentation and implants to make sure that we weren't going to expose ourselves to blackouts or brownouts in terms of inventory. And so, that increased literally, you know, kind of substantially the amount of capital as a small company we needed to raise to ensure our growth going on in the future. And so I'll just give kudos at Shoulder Innovations. Matt Ahern leads our supply chain team, has just did a fabulous job engaging with our supply base and helping them to understand what our vision was and securing commitment, if that makes sense, to be able to deliver that. But at the same time, understanding the challenges faced by suppliers with labor, which is ongoing, right, continues to be a challenge, and recognizing that we weren't the only ones with challenges. The entire industry was facing challenges, and understanding how to work together to work through those things. So that was the number one solve for us. And then, of course, we find ourselves in a position now where public markets are that, the venture investing world is still extremely challenged. It's very difficult to raise capital these days. And so that's the squeeze spot for small companies right now today, is finding that capital to be able to invest in supply chain to make sure you've got supply. So anyway.
Thanks, Rob. Dr. Goyle, could you jump in on that same question?
Problems for small companies sometimes are the same problems that big companies have, right? So it's, Zimmer Biomet, obviously the scale of supply chain is significant. With the geopolitical uncertainties, the global pandemic, the disruption in the supply chain is, as most of you all know, I would say all of you know, is dramatic. Dramatic. And it's forced us to have diversification into different supply partners. So instead of single sourcing things, we're having multiple different vendors provide the opportunity. We're giving multiple vendors opportunities. And that the geopolitical uncertainty in like Ukraine, Russia, China, it's created challenges, but in a way, I would tell you it's strengthened our team, because now we have people that have gone through essentially a war on the supply chain side, and so I think we're uniquely positioned now moving forward. I think we went into this never thinking that this was something like this could ever happen, right? And then on the global pandemic side, it's been interesting to be a part of a company that's heavily leveraged in elective orthopedic procedures, right? And so it's opened the eyes of all of us to diversification of revenue streams, not only within orthopedics, but even outside of orthopedics. And so as we think about M&A and the growth opportunities for us, it's near adjacencies with sports, regenerative medicine, biologics, but it's also some white space areas that maybe someone wouldn't have thought a company like Zimmer Biomet would chase before. So
sure.
I would say it's opened everyone's eyes, and it's been it will in the end strengthen us dramatically. Yeah.
Great. Thanks. Kevin, how did it impact Axcelis?
So us, similar to what Rob said, we're a very small company. Quick background on Axcelis. We started out, we're in the spinal implant space in orthopedics. We started out about 6 years ago as Integrity Implants, really focused on a unique technology for degenerative fusion procedures. The pressures that we faced, and back in April of 21, we actually merged with Fusion Robotics, an enabling technology in the robotic space, navigation space, and that's when we rebranded the company to Axcelis. But the pressures that we faced since then really have been tremendously based on the financial markets. The rising interest rates, the lack and scarcity of equity funding into companies really put us behind and changed significantly the trajectory of our company. Our plan was to go public through a SPAC in the spring of 2022. All of the changes in the market really forced us to make that decision not to pursue that goal, and so we dropped out of that opportunity. Then really had to sit down and think about strategically, how do we continue to position our company to stay on this trajectory of high growth that we've been on. Fortunately, through some of the changes, we were able to sell off one of our assets, the REMI technology that we had acquired back in April of 21. We wound up selling that off for $55 million to a larger competitor in our space. But what that did for us was really allow us to, number one, refocus on what the core roots of our company were. And that is, again, a very unique spinal implant with a tremendous amount of IP portfolio that we're sitting on, and again, needing capital to continue to grow and invest in that technology to get it to marketplace. So we're able to pay down a lot of our debt, get ourselves refocused, really take an opportunity to look at our supply chain, our manufacturing relationships, and how we can continue to drive towards high growth, but profitability is really the key right now in today's marketplace. At the same time, we sat there as an organization and really thought through, how do we optimize our structure of our organization? How do we actually maximize our opportunities in the market, take the appropriate capital and invest in those markets to continue to grow? So we spent a considerable part of 23, our asset sale was in just 60 days ago. April 19th was the announcement, and at the same time really set our company up positioned to continue to focus on our core roots, our core foundation, and continue to grow in this marketplace. So, for us, it's really been, the struggle has been the financial pressures.
Thank you. Dr. Barsoom?
So it's a great question. I mean, I think, to Dr. Goyle's point, what we just went through over the last few years is hopefully going to be a once-in-a-lifetime experience for all of us, right? I mean, these pandemics don't come around every day. The last one was about 100 years ago. Hopefully we go at least another 100 years before the next one. But I think what it did show was a few things that are pretty important. Number one, recognizing the macroeconomic pressures that we've all been dealing with. High inflation that was due to a lot of cash flowing into the markets. Cash ended up being saved, spent. Liquidity dried up, made things very difficult for hospitals, for private companies, for publicly traded companies. And when you look at all of this, I think altogether, you recognize that the organizations that have done the best are the ones that manage their financial challenges the best. I would say that the last couple of years have probably not been a time where we've seen tremendous advancement in terms of technology. We've seen a tremendous advancement in our understanding of the financial markets and how to manage cash and how to manage debt during this time. So organizations that had a strong financial team have probably done better. And if you look at the past, over the last 100 years, anytime the country has gone into any kind of a recession or any kind of a challenging period financially, organizations that managed their money the best were the ones that came out significantly stronger. So, having come from a healthcare hospital background and doing a lot of wrestling with our CFO over the desire that I always had to grow and grow and grow, and his desire to invest in endowments, I have a newfound recognition for the importance of cash and making sure that you have cash around. So for us, maybe I'll answer this question wearing two hats. The one hat on the hospital side, our organization, HOPCO, we work with practices, with hospitals, and with insurance companies. We have relationships with over 50 hospitals. And I think the biggest challenge that the hospitals have been dealing with over this period of time is, candidly, patients found other places to get higher quality care for a lower cost, right? I mean, think about your own family members. Would you rather take them to a hospital for care, or would you rather take them to a surgery center for care? I think everybody would say, I'd rather go to a surgery center. It's cheaper, the patient experience is better, the quality, as long as the patient is healthy, is at least as good. So hospitals are in a very, very challenging time. And if you look in the United States, we're probably overbedded by 40%. That's the dirty little secret that nobody wants to talk about, right? Nobody can imagine closing a hospital. But the truth of the matter is, we don't need as many hospitals as we have. And that's going to be a very big challenge for folks to wrap their minds around, because everybody wants a hospital in their community, in their backyard. And we just, from again, a macroeconomic perspective, we shouldn't be paying for them, we shouldn't have them. We have to figure out how to manage that. From a smaller company perspective, HOPCO is now about a $2 billion company, so it's not that small anymore. But again, kind of from a private, smaller company perspective, understanding what our customers' needs are, I think for us, the way that we've been able to advance. And I know we're going to talk about digital enablement later, but that has been a major pivot for us, is how do you grow that digital footprint? How do you make your success less contingent on necessarily labor and more contingent on a digital approach to expanding your footprint? And I think that's been very successful for us.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Goyle, one of the things that I think the pandemic accelerated is the move of procedures to these surgery centers. How do companies, how do OEMs need to, and suppliers need to change their thinking or evolve to meet the needs of these settings?
Yeah, that's like top of mind for, I think, any company in Zimmer Biomet's arena right now. I mean, if it's not top of mind, it's problematic, right? The growth in the outpatient setting, as Will was referencing, it's dramatic. Over the next 5 years, the shift of patients to the outpatient surgical facilities is, I think, planned at over 75% growth over the next 5 years. I mean, if you look at joint replacement specifically, the pandemic really put some rocket fuel on that, because surgeons got comfortable and patients got comfortable with that shift. It was already occurring, but it really got that rocket fuel behind it with the pandemic, with the ASCs being the only place that patients could have surgery because the hospitals weren't allowing it, right? And from an orthopedic device company standpoint, the complexity is you had a surgeon that was going to one hospital doing 12 cases a day, potentially, and that surgeon is now maybe going to the same hospital, but also 2 to 3 ASCs in some situation, and maybe even only doing 2 to 3 cases at each ASC, depending on availability of surgical time. Well, that might seem fine for the surgeon, but for us, that creates massive logistical issues with numbers of trays. Think about a total knee replacement might be anywhere from 3 to 6 trays. You're talking about those trays need to be present at the ASC 24 hours before for sterilization, per their requirements, at a hospital potentially 48 hours before. And so from us, from a supply standpoint, super complex, and our E&O goes up, our cost to serve the business goes up quite a bit. And so for us, it's also opening up opportunities from an innovation standpoint with, okay, if we're going to have the shift to ASC, well, how do we streamline our process to serve that business? So, and whether that be instruments or implants themselves, or it could be in a totally different category. It goes back into the opportunity for innovation and diversification of our business. So we're talking about digital. How can we serve from a patient engagement standpoint in the ASC? What are the technology needs in the ASC as it relates to efficiency? That's the big focus in the ASC, moving through the process, right? And so I would tell you, it's a logistical nightmare to some degree, which opens up massive opportunities for those who want to innovate in the space. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Kevin, how did this shift impact Axcelis?
Yeah, so specific to the spine, there's obviously very clear evidence and accelerating evidence that procedures are moving from the traditional hospital OR setting to the ASC. As was just previously said, it adds a lot of complexity to the business. When I look at, first of all, the enabling technology that's used in an OR, whether it's a robot, whether it's navigation, imaging technology, when you look at the ASC, how does that fit into with a much smaller footprint? How does that technology fit into an ASC? When you look specifically at the implant side of it, instrument trays, as was mentioned, really need to minimize the number of instruments in a set, minimize the number of sets in a facility. As we all know, ASCs don't have that capability of sterilization that a hospital might have. The set turns become very critical, both from the ASC perspective, from a cost, also from a manufacturing perspective. Implants in spine, minimizing the number of implants, and candidly, sterile pack is the way to go there, again, to help us from the manufacturing perspective, but also from the ASC perspective, inventory management, ease of use. Another big area that we're focused on Axcelis is that surgical education. Spine procedures have been done in an ASC, particularly mostly cervical, some disc work, but now as we're talking about in our niche, degenerative fusion, how do we educate the surgeons, the staff, to become much more efficient and effective in doing those type of procedures? Minimally invasive, obviously, is the key to all of this. Endoscopic procedures, awake fusion procedures, those type of avenues is what we're investing in right now from a training and education perspective, a technology perspective, in order to be able to fit into that niche, and partnering with the ASCs in order to understand what their needs are, their business model, and then provide the solutions and technology that fit their model.
Dr. Barsoom.
Yeah, so I would say a couple things. First of all, I think we're living in an era of good enough, right? So is the technology good enough to use today, or does it really deserve the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to advance it incrementally? I think we're recognizing today that real technologies that are going to advance us dramatically need to be somewhat transformational, right? The era of 3% automatic hikes in the cost of an implant that are in your contract are gone, right? Hospitals aren't going to be willing to accept that anymore. ASCs, where you have surgeon investors, aren't going to be willing to accept that anymore. So I think the focus ought to be simplicity, scalability, and the ability to make it simple, right? Simple, scalable, reproducible. That's really the key to technologies today as we start shifting more and more into the ASC space. So, again, minimizing trays, keeping it as simple as we possibly can so we can deliver the highest quality product for the lowest cost. That's what the customers are looking for today. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be thinking about innovation, but innovation needs to be transformational innovation. It needs to be a completely different way of doing something. It needs to be around augmented reality. It needs to be, around what we're seeing right now in the orthopedic world with robotics, right? It needs to be so dramatic that somebody says, wow, that is really worth my effort. That is worth my time. I'm going to look at that and really consider maybe paying extra for it. But if it's just a matter of changing an angle here or there or adding a little widget to a product, you're not going to get a premium for it. So don't bother wasting your time with that. I think it's hard to accept, but it's the reality. So for the folks sitting in this room, what I would really be encouraging you to think about more and more is how do you maintain margin or even grow margin, recognizing that reimbursement may be lower. So if I do an operation in a hospital and then do that same surgery in an ASC, the reimbursement is less, might be 30 or 40% less, right? So my hope is that my partners in that ASC, being the folks in this room, are going to be willing to sell it to me for less. Well, to sell it to me for less, you have to produce it for less. So how do you manufacture for less money? How do you sterilize for less? How do you package for less? How do you deliver it for less? How do you put it in fewer trays that cost you less? All of those things are going to be important so that margins can be maintained or even grown in an era where we have to reduce reimbursement.
Rob, how has that shift impacted you?
So we, at Shoulder Innovations, we kind of anticipated this shift to some degree and specifically looked at shoulder arthroplasty and said, what has to change in order to support that shift happening? So unfortunately, the reality is for most implants out on the market, it's very difficult to change the surgical technique. So to just sit down with 8 trays of instruments and say, which ones can we chuck out of the box and make this smaller footprint, it tends to be somewhat impossible. You have to go all the way back and reconceive how is the implant and the surgical technique executed so that you can develop a platform that supports an ASC environment. That's exactly what we did at Shoulder Innovations. And so we arrived with a full spectrum of shoulder arthroplasty products and 2 trays of instruments, which is palatable for an ASC environment. 6 or 8 trays of instruments is not palatable. They're constrained from a capacity standpoint, not because the surgeon operates slower, but because the ASC physically cannot handle, from a capacity standpoint, that amount of metal and plastic. The second thing that we did is Genesis sponsored a business called SPDX, or founded the business, and it's focused on actually taking the decontamination and sterilization of surgical instrumentation for orthopedics off-site. So think about, they're going to handle it like laundry instead of an inside SPD facility. And so what that does is immediately removes that constraint at an ASC that maybe used to doing carpal tunnel procedures. Suddenly they can do total knee replacements, right? And that will fundamentally improve and accelerate the ability to grow joint replacement at those orthopedic centers. I will counter one point, which is that from an economic standpoint, our findings so far in the ASC environment is actually not so unfavorable as one might guess. A couple years ago, I would have anticipated exactly what you described, but what we find is that so many of the ASCs are owned by surgeons that are actually operating in them, that the opportunity for our customers, our orthopedic customers, to kind of gain financially is improved because they have multiple pathways of revenue in an ASC environment where they actually have a significant ownership position. And so the pricing on pressure has not been dramatic as one might have guessed, at least so far.
Dr. Barsoom, you spoke about this need for transformational change and aggressive innovation. How do we balance that desire and that need with value-based care? How can we reconcile those two?
Yeah, so Look, I mean, Michael Porter, who I think is the guy that obviously introduced healthcare to the idea of value-based care, defines it pretty simply, right? It's quality over cost. So to deliver value-based care, you don't have to be less expensive. You just have to be so much better that the additional cost makes it worthwhile, right? I think that's a key point. So, my point around, being thoughtful about how and where you innovate is meant to get folks to think about concentrating your innovative dollars on truly transformational technologies as opposed to incrementally improving a technology that already exists. So it's perfectly fine to expect that something may cost more if it is dramatically better, right? If you look at the United States today, we're spending close to $4 trillion a year on healthcare. Okay, that's a tremendous amount of money. It's almost 20% of our gross domestic product. That is simply too high a percentage. So we have to be thinking about what technologies are going to drive us towards perhaps spending less because our outcomes are better, readmissions are lower, infections have gone down, dislocations and hip replacements have gone down, plates aren't breaking, all of those types of things. If you can make it so much better that the overall cost of care goes down, it's well worth it. So I think that's kind of how you have to think about it. Are these transformational technologies so good that they're worth paying a premium for? And it has to be more than, in the first 90 days they're better. They have to be better for years and years and years to really make them worthwhile. The other comment that I would make that is maybe not quite as applicable to the folks in this room is we are, in the healthcare world, we're very, very good at innovating technologies and surgical procedures and medical procedures, right? We're good at that. It's kind of in our DNA. What, as a country, we're not very good at is innovating healthcare delivery. So if you sit in a room with hospital executives, and I'm not saying this in a pejorative way, I'm just being honest, they don't really want to see a major shift in how we deliver healthcare because they're good at what they do. It's successful, it works. The problem is it's simply too expensive. So the idea of change causes a lot of fear for those folks. We have to try to make it more palatable as a country so that we can really innovate in healthcare delivery, where I would say we have really lagged behind in terms of that innovation.
Rob, how are you thinking about value-based care and innovation?
Yeah, so our experience has been, we find ourselves in a position that's maybe not so unlike the automotive industry found itself in 20 years ago, where every year the car gets better and the price never changes, right? And that's, so to your point, all of our products that we look at developing are better than the last products. They have new features and widgets, and we also assume that the price is going down, right? So it's a both and scenario. Indeed, value of care is outcomes over cost, right? And outcomes must get better, that's assumed, and cost is going down. That's the mantra or the assumption that that we make in the environment. I think that we have to recognize that there has been a massive power shift in decision making in the orthopedic industry over the last 20 years, and that much more of the decision making is happening at the administrative level, to your point, and much less at the clinical level, and that's a challenge for our industry, right? That we have to recognize and create more value. Right? So,
Dr. Groh, how are you thinking of it at Zimmer Biomet?
I mean, I would say not dissimilar from what we've heard here. It's interesting if you think about innovation. If you take a platform technology and try to reverse apply it to clinical scenarios, you end up with a widget that has an extra angle, an extra this, an extra that. That is not meaningful. And I think that's what Will's getting at, which is you need to solve real problems, right? And that takes clinical data. You need to prove the value, prove the outcome. How is it better? How much better is it? Is it better enough to justify that additional cost? And we certainly agree with that. But I think it's also opening up opportunities. So, the value-based care at its core is improving patient outcomes while reducing costs, right? So if you think about that from digital standpoint and what's happening with access to digital or access to mobile, patients want to be virtual nowadays. You think about the opportunities with even telehealth. do you need to see your provider for a post-op visit? Do you need to see your provider at 4 months following surgery if you're doing well? Do you need to see them at 5 years following your surgery if you're doing well? Could that be done remotely? Could you just get a remote X-ray taken? There's so much opportunity for innovation in streamlining, I guess a little bit what he was talking about, which is the delivery, right? There's huge opportunity there. And so I would tell you that I think we know, when we think about innovation, we always think about solving meaningful problems for the customer, and that's how we approach it from the get-go. And so for us, I don't know if it changes much, it just makes us emphasize it more, and then look for outside-the-box solutions around quality, cost, efficiency, and things that are becoming more important now.
Great. And Kevin, as Excellis is now refocused on your core competency, how are you thinking about innovating in this kind of?
Yeah, again, not a lot of dissimilar thoughts from what was already mentioned. Value-based, proven, cost-effective. Doesn't have to be less expensive. Really what the focus needs to be on is that continuum of care for that patient, particularly a spine patient. How do we reduce that overall cost? How do we reduce the cost of delivery to that patient and the follow-up with that patient? When we think of innovation, we think of, progress. Innovation is incredibly important to continue to progress that continuum of care, progress on better outcomes for the patients, and really capture the unmet needs, both for the surgeon and, again, for the clinical outcomes. I think what's incredibly important for us to really consider and start to think about is collecting that data. The data that will prove an efficacious procedure, prove a value-based type, cost-effective procedure inclusive of technology that's going to get it there, is really what's going to be key to all of this. And so when we start thinking about this is how do we collect that data? How do we demonstrate that predictive outcome that will again become a value-based, cost-effective methodology without hindering the innovation to continue to increase patient outcomes and satisfaction?
And Kevin, I'll keep it with you. What is your bold prediction, or what do you think is the most transformative change we'll see come into the orthopedic industry over the next couple of years?
It's an interesting question that, again, as a small company, just undergoing a tremendous amount of change is something that we're really starting to think about. For me, what I think about right now is artificial intelligence, machine learning, those type of platforms, virtual reality, those type of platforms are going to improve everything from diagnosis, diagnostic type of things, personalized medicine, predictive analytics. Those platforms, I think, offer a tremendous amount of opportunity. AI-based algorithms that will be able to capture and gather all of this data and sum it down into what is the most efficacious solution for this type of diagnosis, pathology. When you think about also all of the newness of monitoring devices, wearables, smart technology, again, improving the initial diagnosis of the patient, proactive type of care, where does that lead us into? And so it's something that, again, in the spine segment that we're in, and a small company, things that we're really starting to explore, and how then we can become a leader as a niche company, a leader, and accelerate that type of progress to, again, beat out our larger competitors.
Dr. Barsoom, what do you think is coming down?
So I think the biggest challenge that we have in healthcare today, other than cost, is connectivity with our patients. Everybody in the room, just think for a minute about it. If you have a child or a parent, or you yourself have had a healthcare problem or a challenge, the biggest challenge is communicating with your healthcare team, understanding what you should expect in terms of your care. Is my recovery going as expected? Is it delayed? Am I ahead? What should I expect from the surgery? How much is it going to hurt? When will I be able to get back on a bike? When can I get back on a golf course? That connectivity that we want to have with our care teams is a major challenge for us in the United States, because everybody's busy, right? Your care team's busy, you're busy. It's hard to create that level of connectivity. So I think, to Kevin's point, when it comes to kind of digital enablement and how we can connect better, I think that's a real opportunity for us. So, having an app, for example, that tells you exactly how you're performing through an AI type module, having two-way messaging with your care team to tell you how you're performing, using computer vision when you're doing your physical therapy that coaches you in PT to do your therapy better, right? Bringing healthcare to the patient and making it easier for the patient to understand and to communicate and to manage their expectations is a huge opportunity, because I'll tell you, in the world of musculoskeletal care, we don't do a great job of managing patient expectations. Patients will get a knee replacement and think that they can be golfing again in a week, or think that they can be back on the tennis court playing singles tennis in 4 weeks. That's not a realistic expectation. So extending providers through digital enablement will be a major step forward for our patients to get better connected and to be able to manage their care better.
Dr. Goyle.
So I couldn't agree with that more. I think that, what you're referring to is patient engagement platforms that provide connectivity between patients and providers and care teams. And honestly, I would say that technology exists, and it's a question of adoption now, because that exists in so many different formats with so many different companies and providers. And I think adoption by not only consumers, but adoption by healthcare providers. There's, it goes back to time. Some healthcare providers continue to resist the adoption there because the financial mechanisms to compensate aren't aligned, right? They're not necessarily getting compensated for the extra time that they even spend answering questions at 3 months after surgery. And so, optimizing that delivery mechanism is certainly going to be important. I would tell you that if I had to pick the one transformation that is going to drive healthcare in the next 5 years, it's hinged on two things. I'm gonna call it objectifying the episode of care. Today, the predominant number of decisions that are made by a healthcare provider are completely subjective. So a surgeon looks at an X-ray and says, okay, this person has hip arthritis. They talk to the patient, and they decide based on fairly subjective information whether that person should have a hip surgery, or based on subjective information whether someone should have a partial knee replacement or a total knee replacement. There is huge opportunity for us to objectify the episode of care throughout the continuum. So not just preoperative, but intraoperative and postoperative. When should someone come in because there's a problem? Can you identify the problem based on objective sensor-based data that identifies that this patient is at high risk for either a periprosthetic joint infection or a manipulation under anesthesia or whatever the problem may be? So objectifying the episode of care from the non-op state all the way through the time that someone's at home. And that is based on, honestly, it's based on AI algorithms that allow that to happen. Today, if someone needs if you're looking at someone that potentially needs a revision surgery, a surgeon will line up 4 X-rays looking at the implant and changes that happened to the implant over the last 4 years, as an example, looking for lines and changes. And isn't that crazy? From a consumer standpoint, I would look at that and laugh. You're looking for those lines. Can't you have someone tell me if it's loose or if it's changed position? Your eyes have to identify that. Boy, should you have the same surgery if you're in Tuscaloosa or in New York at the hospital for special surgery? Yeah, I'd love the provider to be enabled with the same tools so that the outcome can be optimal in either location. So, yeah.
Good. Rob, what do you see as the greatest area for transformation?
Yeah, similar themes. No question, in the next kind of 2, 3, 4 years, you're going to hear a lot about robots, a lot about AR, a lot about AI. Those are the themes, those are the obvious things, and those aren't so. I don't want to say they're not exciting, but there's just so much massive investment going into those areas. But when I think about those things, a robot in the operating room, for example, the technology that's transforming the life of the patient in a robotic hip replacement or a robotic knee replacement is not the robot, it's the implant, right? And so it's a methodology for the delivery. We begin to turn our head more towards the themes you guys are talking about, which is, it's not about whether we use a robot to deliver an implant into a patient, it's whether the patient actually gets an implant. Because when you start to think through the interactions with patients and a physician's improving their interactions with their patient, there's a cost to that, right? It's both time and money. And then you have to ask the question, who's paying for that? The payers are paying for that. That's who's paying for that. And so the amount of data necessary to prove that payers should reimburse that type of activity, which is necessary, is dramatic. And we're going to see a continued innovation as it relates to what's happening at the payer level and their influence on what's happening in our industry. And I think we as an industry need to redirect our innovation efforts into building the relationships with those payers so that we can create business models that work in the healthcare systems and reduce cost for the payers, because that's who's paying, right? I mean, that's where our kind of thinking is focused at this time anyway. So.
And we just have a few minutes left, so if you all will indulge me, I just want to take my first question, that how did the pandemic or disruption change your company, and turn it on its head. What were some personal growth lessons that you took from that whole period of upside down industry? Rob, can we just start with you?
Sure. Obviously we were very much a virtual company beforehand. But what I found, just on a personal level, what I found was suddenly everyone was virtual, right? And I was really enjoyed that a lot, right? You would have a meeting with a supplier who's at home with their child having piano lessons and their dog running around in the background and the Zoom camera. I just found that really fun, and it caused me and I guess my teams and the people around us to be more human and less professional. If you'd looked at me 25 years ago, there were two lives, right? There was the persona that I presented in the office, and then there was my environment at home. Those are now completely intermingled, and I just absolutely love that type of environment and encourage that, at least in our employees. So that's,
Great answer.
Yeah.
Thanks. Dr. Barson?
Yeah, I think for me, it was just on a personal level, an amazing level of respect and enjoyment of working with a healthcare team to prepare for what we thought was going to be a horrible, horrible, horrible thing in every single hospital. I mean, I remember we were taking apart ventilators to try to figure out how can you make 3 ventilators out of 1. We were looking at literally warehouse space where we were going to set up army cots and have hundreds of patients on ventilators. I mean, thank God those things never happened, not to minimize the horrible amount of sadness and death that did happen, but it could have been so much worse. But watching people come together and engage, for the betterment of other human beings were amazing. I mean, watching our medical intensive care unit nurses gown up and go in and take care of patients that were positive, and we had no idea how much risk there really was to those nurses and to our intensivists, and walking into the room, we didn't know. I mean, we really genuinely didn't know, and people were putting at least what they thought was their lives on the line to take care of others. Was incredibly amazing. I mean, it was amazing to me.
Great. Dr. Goyle?
So on the more professional side of what we went through, that quarter in 2020 was probably the worst quarter in the history of the company. Elective surgeries came to a halt. Our major revenue stream went down to almost nil, right? We took care of our team, right? We took care of our sales force. We have more than 2,500 sales force members around the United States. And speaking of like our financial ability to do that based on cash at hand, we prioritized our team, and I think our team recognizes that even to date, that the company went to bat for them during the time that they weren't able to do their job, and patients weren't able to be served, but we took care of them, and that's had a lasting influence on how we function as a company, and it will have a lasting influence for all of our team members because they remember that. So that's been, I think, pretty dramatic for us from a team perspective. And I'm proud to be part of a company that did that and will continue to do that for their team members.
Great, thank you. Kevin, how about you?
Yeah, I think about a couple things really come to mind when you ask that question. Specifically, I agree with Rob said, kind of that blending when everyone's working virtual. We were pretty much in an office setting. Again, we had some people working remote every once in a while, but all of a sudden now everyone's remote. And kind of that ability to understand people's challenges, whether it's space in the house, 3 kids trying to do homework, dogs barking. So you had that kind of that blend of that professional, personal life and acceptance that, that people have to do the best that they can in the environment that they're in. The thing that struck me during this time was being the father of 3 sons that have gotten out of school and started their professional careers, so I call them off the payroll kids. They working remotely, how do they get that mentorship? How do they get that guidance to continue to advance in their career? I think many of us, had that opportunity starting off, whether it was, in a hospital setting, a professional setting, that you had a mentor, you had a structure, and putting that in place that they can continue to develop their skill sets and careers and reach their goals. So we made a really conscious effort as leaders of the organization as well, as to make sure that the younger folks that we have hired had that same opportunity for exposure and development purposes. So we've spent a lot of time trying to do that as well.
Great. Thank you. I think we'll leave it at that. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. Thank you all for joining us this morning. The show floor is open, and I hope you have a very productive meeting. We'll see you out there. Thank you.
Thank you.